The cutout represents Alan Wake's persona, in my opinion. It's not who he is,
Yes.
but it's who everyone thinks he is and who he presents himself as and who he might think he is as well.
Yeah.
But it's not who he actually is, right? The empty shell that he wears as a mask, it's not him, not really. It's just the image of himself, and it's one that he hates, mind you. He wants to leave it behind, but Barry keeps bringing it along with him.
We're talking about a departure from living this false life behind the mask of the persona. And that requires the first part of integration of the self is facing the shadow.
It's the horror story.
So the departure, which is the name of this novel, is the process by which he goes to face his shadow. Episode 4, The Truth. Alan Wake finds himself trapped in the eerie confines of Cauldron Lake Lodge, where Dr. Emil Hartman insists he's losing his mind, claiming Alice is dead. The sinister atmosphere thickens as the Anderson brothers reveal that this is no dream. It's all terrifyingly real. Alan's attempts to write are disrupted by chaos downstairs. He finds the Andersons battling a nurse, then discovers Barry imprisoned in a closet after a failed rescue attempt. Together, they retrieve stolen manuscript pages and a revolver from Hartman's office. Hartman's plea for collaboration falls on deaf ears as the dark presence invades. Alan locks Hartman inside, fleeing the lodge amidst a demonic transformation, facing off against Taken and poltergeists. With Barry, he races toward the Andersons' farm, only to crash their car amid falling rocks.
Hartman's office is very interesting. I when we woke up there, I was like, this game is really getting wild. I was not expecting this at all. Yeah. And it was a very strange kind of lull. I think this is where you start to realize just how fragmented the pieces are of this story, of what's going on here. And it kind of breaks it feels like it kind of breaks the linearity a little bit, right? Like, wait a second. It's almost like there's multiple stories happening at once, right? And as soon as you walk into the lodge, it's hilarious too, because you're not the only patient there. So you can walk around and talk to people. There's a woman like singing in the corner to herself. There's a guy who's just like freaking out and wants to fight you. Of course, the Anderson brothers are there.
Yep.
And it's funny because when Dr. Hartman talks about them, he's basically just like, yeah, they're a lost cause. But, we try to be nice to them anyways.
Yeah, right.
It's a really fun place to be, actually, to just walk around the lodge.
Yeah, I agree. I felt like this is where I started getting really kind of invested in where the story was going.
Exactly. Yeah.
We have now finished the game at this point, so spoilers are on the board as far as what we can talk about at this point. I felt like the story was going either one or two ways here. Either we were going to get a full Silent Hill treatment where we realize the main character is simply coping by creating a fantasy in their mind, but really they're guilty of something terrible or something like that.
Right.
Which is kind of
I felt that a lot.
The narrative that Hartman is pitching to him here, right?
Yeah, he's like, you feel bad because you did this and then you drove the car. The way he talks about Alice dying is a different way than the way we have experienced it, though, from episode 1.
Right. So it's like you are coping with a tragedy or with some kind of trauma, feeling responsible for your marriage souring and getting to like a point where it was on the brink of being lost, and you feel guilty for the tragic death of your wife, which just occurred, and you are now creating this fantasy world in which the story you're writing is coming to life, and there's this supernatural dark presence, and you've made yourself into this hero who's a victim.
Yeah, a victim hero.
Like all of this kind of stuff, right? And so, it's kind of like pitching that as like a possibility of what's really going on here.
Right.
And then on the other side of that, is Hartman actually involved somehow with this dark presence?
Right.
Or is that just me not accepting the truth?
Yeah, it almost feels, as Hartman's talking to you about these things, it almost feels like he's trying to push you in a certain direction so that you'll write the story. Like the whole point of this lodge is like, hey, this is a place for artists who've gone batty to regain their creative instincts and create new works of art, right?
Yeah.
And so when he's kind of giving us this story here of, oh, actually, this is what really happened, and you're this, and this is why you think this, it almost feels like he's crafting a character for you to be, or he's crafting a story for you to live in, right? That's going to get those creative juices flowing. And so he's not credible or believable by nature, by the nature of his job.
Right.
You don't know, hey, are you just saying this to get me to write another book?
Right.
Or are you telling me the truth?
Yeah.
And that's where Alan is. I mean, even earlier on with his wife, it's like there's that doubting, hey, you're just doing this because you want me to write my next book, huh?
Yeah.
You don't really care about me. And that means that there's mistrust. The relationship is not founded on trust.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the case, that he assumes that everyone in the world just wants him to write this next book. And so he doesn't actually trust anyone out there. Yeah. Right. And so he's kind of isolated himself in this little, in his own little world. And he's done it to himself. But at the same time, then us as the player, we start seeing the world through his eyes, right? And then I don't trust Dr. Hartman as I'm playing this part. Yeah. I'm just like, you seem to be a little too sure of the facts as you're explaining what happened and what you think is the right course of action. It sounds like you're trying to spin a little bit of a narrative too, to try to influence his writing. That's what it sounds like.
Yes.
Just as the player.
Yeah, I mean, they do a good job of casting doubt kind of both ways.
Yeah.
So, like, in the one sense, what Dr. Hartman is saying, like, just as a baseline, makes a lot more sense than supernatural darkness.
You're right.
Is, like, taking over the town, and, like, a bunch of, like, people are possessed and coming after me, and I have to kill them. Like that on its face obviously makes more sense than what Alan is saying. So there's just that fact.
Yes.
There's also the evidence in Hartman's office of the phone conversation that Alice had with him when she called in. I don't feel like I can talk to my husband anymore. He's so angry all the time.
Yeah, I remember that.
And Hartman, I think, asks her, like, hey, has he hit you? Has he been violent with you? Oh, no, nothing like that. She is a little too quick to deny. Now, I'm not saying Alan did do that. I'm just saying that it sounds that way on the phone. It for a person who feels like they're losing their mind, to hear this conversation from your wife that you weren't privy to, and you didn't know this was the real reason you were coming to this town,
right?
Or at least her real reason for doing it. It's like, oh my goodness, did I really know? And he talks about the guilt that he feels right after that. So clearly, he is self-aware enough to know the way he's been treating Alice and the way that he has damaged his relationship. That's legit,
right?
And so that lends all the credence to what Hartman is saying. It makes me want to believe that. But at the same time, Hartman is so pompous and loves the sound of his own voice and is so condescending and so obviously leading him.
Obviously, yeah.
That it's like, okay, no, he's got some ulterior motive here too.
Yeah.
So I think they just did a really good job in this scene in particular, this whole sequence inside the lodge, of creating doubt in the player for, like, what's the real story here?
Yeah.
This is where I became the most invested in that part of the mystery was here.
Me too, especially as then the darkness starts to approach. And Dr. Hartman's like, oh, funny. I don't remember hearing about a storm in the weather report. It's fine. Let's just go back inside. And it's like, okay. So, and then you can see the storm approaching too. It's like, this is bad. What's going to happen? And at first I was thinking, oh, okay, chapters 1, 2, and 3, or specifically 2 and 3, they're kind of this one dream world. Now we're in the real world, right?
Yeah.
But once the darkness shows up at the cabin, things start going crazy here now too. So it's like, oh man, did we wake up, or are we still asleep? Or is this just the facts? Is this just the real world? This is how it is around this lake in this part of the world in this story. It really starts throwing you for a loop. But specifically when you talk to the Anderson brothers, those guys are hilarious. And I love how Odin literally has an eye patch, and Tor is playing with this like fake hammer. And I think at some point when he's fighting with the nurse, he even calls it Mjolnir. He's like, feel the wrath of Mjolnir.
Yes,
and you hear the squeak. That's it.
Yes.
Those guys are so great. But after Alan talks to them, and they're just like, look, Sonny, it's all real. Sonny, go to our farm. Everything's going to be, they'll explain it all. Go to our, does he say farm?
Yeah,
it's like a farmhouse.
So they have a farm, like a plot of land where they lived outside of the town. And
they had a lot of property, actually.
Yeah,
and some expensive stuff.
Yeah, they have like a whole stage out there. I mean, that's kind of the climax of chapter 4 is a big battle on the stage with like their rock music playing in the background as you're like killing a bunch of dudes.
Gameplay wise, like best part.
Yeah, and there's like a fireworks show, and it's pretty extravagant. So
it's so fun. But they're basically saying, hey, we hid some stuff because as soon as we got committed to this institution, we didn't bring it with us, right? But there's stuff there. Like, you got to go check it out. And it's in their music, hidden in the music. Is like
there's like a message that will essentially lead him where he needs to go to find the answer of how to like stop this encroaching
So this
darkness.
is not only Thomas Zane. Now we're going to take this like 50-year-old band, right, from like the 70s. And like, oh, it was written in their song the whole time too, right? Yeah. A lot of this stuff just seems on its face like ridiculous. But then here is the world, right? The world really seems to be this way in front of Alan Wake. So they're right. Dr. Hartman's wrong. And now we got to move forward. Yeah. Another fun part is when you see Barry first, because you can kind of hear him behind the door. And as soon as you unlock the door and open it up, the way he's introduced is fascinating, but he's hiding behind the cardboard cutout of Alan Wake. And there's something there. There's something there. Like, why is he doing that? He should have been at the door banging on it. Let me out. What are you doing? You can't do it. I got lawyers, you know? Yeah. He should have been doing that. But instead, he was shouting, or he was talking. You could hear his voice. But I think that's actually saying something, that he is, how would you put this? He is the voice behind the facade, right, of Alan Wake, right? And also, he kind of emerges from, you could say, the shadow of Alan Wake in a way, that he just kind of steps out from behind Alan Wake. And, it's me, I'm Barry. Yeah. And I'm going to take that analogy a little bit further, actually, because I found that cardboard cutout to be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they use it as a running gag.
Yes.
A lot in this game.
But it's wild because he's basically just doing it to get at Rose, right? He's like, that wench, drugged our coffee, so I took this from her coffee shop just to show her, teach her a lesson.
Right.
And but it's not a practical, sensible thing to do, to be carrying that thing around all the time.
Not at all.
But there's a reason for it. I want to get into a little bit later because it comes into play a little bit later. But there's a reason why Barry is carrying the facade of Alan Wake along with him, following Alan Wake wherever he goes.
Yeah. I also really liked, I'm not sure what to call it, but it feels like an almost meta sort of commentary on like the game industry. Because there's the game designer or game developer guy who's like
the face
committed there to the lodge. And he's talking about he's like a game developer, and he's like the craziest guy there.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
He's like the one who's like literally like
shaking his hands
craziest guy there.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff that he says about the difficulties that game developers go through, the headaches, the considerations of the market, and how the corporate meddling kind of stuff we've talked about a lot in the past on our podcast. So I really enjoyed those. That definitely felt like autobiographical again from the game developer's point of view, which they put a lot of their struggle to make this game into the game story. So like that was pretty clear there. And then they had like another painter guy who was outside. On like
that's
the patio
right. He's
there.
painting all those dark, like shadowy images and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And
there was like quite a few like really interesting patients of the lodge if you just go around and like listen to them talk. Had a lot of really fun things to say, so
it was a blast.
It was good stuff.
All right,
I mean I'll just say that again, just reinforcing that this entire story is really purposefully made from an artist's point of view. The struggle, the difficulty of creating something. This comes up in another really big way in the DLC episodes, the Signal and the Rider, which we will get to by the end of this, but just how difficult and hard the creative process is trying to make something that coheres and makes sense and is entertaining and says something meaningful, but doesn't take itself too seriously, but is written in a way that can be taken seriously, is, you know, is a really, really, really difficult thing to do, especially if it's designed by committee and you have a lot of people working on it.
Yep.
And it's taxing emotionally, mentally. It's like super draining. And I think in particular in the games industry, for reasons we've talked about a lot in previous episodes, and I won't go over again, it can take your soul a little bit. And so I feel like they're sneaking some of that frustration, some of that, like, you know, into this little lodge section. And I thought that was really cool.
If you want to play a game that deals with that theme in depth, Sega Gaga is basically all about that.
I've never even heard of that.
All about that. You haven't?
No.
It's at the end of my Dark History video on the gaming industry in Japan, and how hard it is, and how like much it is difficult, how difficult it is to make a game.
Right.
Anyways, that was one of Sega's last games before they kind of had to stop making consoles and all that.
Oh,
fascinating stuff. Separated from Barry, Alan battles through the dark forces to reach the Andersons' stage. In a haunting scene, he and Barry fend off the Taken as the old gods of Asgard's Children of the Elder God blares. A cryptic message reveals that Cynthia Weaver is the enigmatic Lady of Light. So now we've come to the barn. There was like a big boat. They had I would have loved to see the act, like the whole performance
the whole
from this
show.
old metal band.
Dude,
looks like a blast.
It's actually funny because I played this, and then just this week, Carol and I went to see Trans-Siberian Orchestra.
Oh, very fun.
In concert.
Oh,
which was
great.
A freaking awesome show.
Yeah.
But obviously, this is not as extravagant as that is, but like the lights and just like that sort of era of guitar playing and the sort of thing.
The 80s, the kind of 70s.
Reminded me of that. And
they got like an Iron Maiden sort of, maybe old Ozzy Osbourne type kind of vibe.
Of sound to them, Before we got to the farm, though.
I said Iron Maiden. I meant Black Sabbath.
Oh, yeah.
Sort of Iron Maiden, too,
Iron
I guess,
Maiden, too. It's all similar era.
It's all similar in that.
But before we got to the farm, there was, I always forget his name, the guy who was drunk in the jail.
I forget, too. He basically dies,
You run by his house. His friend Danny, that he had been talking about the whole game, is possessed by darkness, and he was kind of locked in a room. No, he does die. You're right.
Yeah,
he's like in a pool of blood, but he gives his last words to
his
you.
Last words
he was
are
killed
like,
by his friend.
What writer would write this?
That's right.
Crappy story.
Would write this kind of crappy story. That was so good. He's talking about like, my friend betrayed me. Like, who wrote this? This is terrible.
He says it's like a bad sequel to a good original.
That's right.
Movie. Yeah,
that was a really, really good line. I thought that was funny. But
it was funny, but at the same time, it's like, oh my god, it was a little calling out Alan Wake right there.
Yeah, but this whole sequence was a lot of fun from a gameplay perspective. Again, you get a good mix here. You get like the driving sequences. You get out. There's things to see along the way.
There's like the puzzle stuff. How do we get in? How do we get out? All of that.
A good mix of stuff going on. And I believe this is also there's like a barn on the farm where you go in and there's a TV. And this is the Night Springs episode where Barry says, "Oh, this is one of the episodes you wrote."
After I reviewed the game and I found that line as well. I'm like, oh yeah, it is. It's right there.
Yeah. So it's a really good chapter. It ends on a really high note. It's like probably my favorite combat sequence in the game.
That was so much fun. It was so much fun. And especially the intro too, because you show up on the stage and Barry's like, look out, and he like runs up as he like plugged in he hit a circuit breaker or something, and it caused the dragon to like breathe fire and it killed a few of the Taken or something like that. It was just wild.
This game does not back away from its like hokiness. It's not like afraid to be silly and to like fully embrace that side of it. I'm not a fan of what has kind of become popular in Western writing today, of sort of like the Whedon-esque sort of like style of comedy
I agree.
mixed into stuff.
That's what has, Marvel and...
This definitely does that to some degree with Barry as a character.
It does.
But in this case, I feel like the whole thing is kind of self-aware enough and is trying to just kind of be fun in a way that for me didn't feel in kind of the same way I've seen it in other things. I'm not saying again that like in every instance in which I find writing of this style that I think it's terrible or something like that.
It's good. Yeah.
It's just that like it can at times get out of balance where like something can never be earnest because it's always interrupting any good moment it could have of like true character depth or like a solemn moment with some kind of joke to like keep the ball rolling.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like this game does that. I don't feel like it's out of balance in that sense. And so this moment is one of its hokiest kind of like high energy moments where you're having this like really intense battle against a ton of freaking possessed Taken dudes. But like it's a rock show at the same time.
Yes.
And Barry's sitting there like, oh yeah, like the whole time, It's pretty silly. But it's also fun.
It was also very fun.
It's not crossing that line of going out of balance, I feel like. So it was good stuff.
I'm remembering too, there was a moment at the Cauldron Lake Lodge where when Alan Wake locks Dr. Hartman into his office space.
Oh, I forgot. I wanted to comment on this.
And as he turns around,
he's like smiling.
He gives the most interesting smile. What do you make of that?
I remember because I was streaming this. I was streaming this at the time.
Yeah.
And so like the darkness is in the room.
Yes.
He kicks the door closed and locks Hartman in there and listens to his screams of death.
Yeah, Hartman is like screaming,
and then turns and like smirks. Not like into the camera lens, but like might as well.
Yes, might as well.
And I'm just something like,
there.
What the hell, Alan? Like that is so messed up.
What do you think that means, though? It's hard for me to know why he was smiling and like, haha, I'm excited about this in that moment, other than like the darkness had got a hold of him or something like that. Maybe.
It's one thing to think a guy is a super condescending a-hole.
Right.
And like, I want to punch this dude in the face. I can't stand him. It's another thing to smile at a person's suffering in death. And like be like, I liked that. That was great. That was
he is
awesome.
aware that this person is not actually dying and none of this is actually real. And
but that's the thing is,
but that's what that moment did for me was like, oh, he knows something I don't. And he's having fun with this. And it's not real to him. That's what I felt. That's what I felt right then with that look.
In that case, like, I would question then, why is he so concerned about Alice if he doesn't think any of this is real?
It was almost like a double. It was almost like a evil twin. Like,
well, there is a whole side of that with Scratch, the alter
bring him
ego.
Up, but we probably can't go too much into
some other time.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something to be said about that.
That there's another part of him that is enjoying this.
We have Ivan commenting on this.
Okay.
Alan is petty, he's saying. Hartman doesn't die as a result of this, to be frank. Well, maybe that's something we learn in...
He's screaming.
in some other game or something.
It seems like something bad happened to him.
It's proof he wasn't crazy. He was right about everything, and Hartman was wrong.
So his smile was like, haha, what
like
now? What now, Hartman?
Confirming, like, I'm not the one who's nuts.
In that sense, you could say that, like, oh, I've never been so happy to encounter the darkness because it let me, like, own my psychologist who told me that I'm imagining things, right? Like, I hate the darkness. It's going to kill me. It's ruining everything. I can't stand this world. But, oh, man, it came at the perfect time. Yeah. Yes, I'm happy that it's here right now. I kind of wish that they didn't include that. I kind of wish it wasn't part of this game.
Yeah. It was weird.
Took me out a little bit.
It was a weird moment.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure how I felt about the main character, but that has happened to me a couple times in the game.
Yeah.
There's been a couple of outbursts for the first time he punches Hartman.
Yeah.
The way he treats Alice in the cabin at the beginning of the game when she kind of reveals the typewriter and he like outbursts at her.
Yeah.
There's been a couple of places where it's like, okay, I guess I'm just supposed to accept this dude's a flawed character. He's got anger problems.
Yes. But here's the thing. Like so let's say you and your mortal enemy are both like up against the wall and a shooting squad shoots him first.
Am I going to like smirk?
Are you like, and then they're going to shoot you now. Like your neck, the darkness is here. The cabin is like going to collapse. Like this is not a good situation to even like take a moment to smirk and to enjoy the fact that your friend next to you, or your not friend, your enemy next to you died before you. And like, I'm excited about that. It's just weird. It
was a strange moment. I agree. But back to the farm.
Yeah, back to the farm.
Get indoors, turn on the song, and it reveals that Cynthia Weaver is the person you need to you need to go.
The Lady of Light. The lamp lady. Yeah, that's what Barry's the one who actually connects it. He's like, why? You couldn't be talking about the lamp lady, right?
Yep.
But
she has the answers that we need to defeat the darkness.
There are a few really good lines that I wanted to bring up from this section of the game, and one of them is, if you go looking for mythology, it may come looking for you. And that's such a Joseph Campbell like thing to say. Like that. I don't know if that's a direct quote, but it feels like it could easily be a direct quote, like from Joseph Campbell. I really liked it though. I thought it was super fun.
Well, I will say, and we're going to get into this more, I think, towards the end of the episode. This game is full of, I think, references to, one, Jungian psychoanalysis, but two, just like archetypes kind of being represented. And that was a Jungian thing, was archetypes.
Absolutely.
But Joseph Campbell was all about breaking down those archetypes into kind of what we call the monomyth or hero myth.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the cardboard cutout of Alan here a little bit now, because this is, where it features the most. And it's interesting that Barry brings the cardboard cutout everywhere, and it's kind of funny and kind of charming, but there's a deeper significance to the cutout than most would realize on the surface. The cutout represents Alan Wake's persona, in my opinion. It's not who he is, but it's who everyone thinks he is and who he presents himself as and who he might think he is as well.
Yeah.
But it's not who he actually is, right? The empty shell that he wears as a mask, it's not him, not really. It's just the image of himself, and it's one that he hates, mind you. He wants to leave it behind, but Barry keeps bringing it along with him, right? So he doesn't love who he is. In fact, later on, we're going to talk about this, but there was an episode of like a late night talk show that Alan participated in where he said, hey, my next novel is going to be a departure from what I've done in the past, right? Like he's trying to change his image. He's trying to, be a different kind of person, I guess. But Barry keeps bringing that along with him, right? This is the Alan Wake that Barry is fighting for. He doesn't want to leave it behind. The persona that's worth $1 billion, that's what's following Alan. The persona is following and watching him just like his shadow. He knows that it's not him, but he doesn't know how to be complete without it, just like he can't be complete without Alice. So Alan is attached to his persona and can't let it go. Yeah. And it actually features in some like solo close-up shots, even later on here as they're like drinking the moonshine.
Yeah.
You see the cardboard cutout. It's just watching from the corner, from the darkness, just kind of watching. And it's a part of Alan's shadow as well.
Yeah. I think that's actually a really, really interesting way of looking at that. Because again, Jung is all over this. Carl Jung.
Totally.
So like persona, the shadow, the collective unconscious are all very much weaved into this. You have your conscious and unconscious mind, integration of those two things, which happens kind of at the end of the game. So looking at the cardboard cutout as his persona, and even some of his TV appearances, which we see a little bit later.
Yeah.
The fact that he's supposed to be there, letting his guard down, being vulnerable with his wife, yet he's got his agent on call, literally whenever he wants to get in contact with him. The fact that even while he's there, people recognize him, people want him to come on to their shows for interviews. Like, he can't really escape that persona, even when he's technically trying to do that. Like this entire vacation was for the purpose of getting away from that. Yeah. And yet it's there, kind of like he can't escape it. And it's almost like in order to escape that, in order to get away from this image of himself that he is attached to, he has to face the shadow, which is a whole thing we'll dive into a little more later. But I like looking at the cardboard cutout as a representation of his persona. I think that's really, really smart.
And one he doesn't like. Remember his reaction when he first entered the coffee shop and he saw that persona and he was just like, ugh. Yeah. I hate that guy. Right. Yeah. He doesn't like
He definitely has
he also doesn't like who he really is
some self-image issues. Yeah. Like big time. And this is really, really important for where, because when I got to the end of the game, the end of episode 6, where it's essentially the credits roll, I did feel like the story was a little bit incomplete at that point. It didn't feel like it had resolved everything. You really need those additional
I think so too, actually.
DLC episodes in order to like complete the thought or the thesis of the game. Yeah. Right? I think it's actually pretty essential to the story to have those 2 additional episodes. But yeah, like it's clear that he's dealing with some self-hatred a little bit here. And he's kind of denying that, or at least is attached to the past a bit. Yeah. And is having a hard time moving on from that, and is obviously almost just stuck, unable to, even when he tries. Right. So yeah, this whole thing is very Jungian in nature, his sort of arc, Alan's arc through this game. Yeah. And it's not really even totally complete by the end of it. It's like he comes to his epiphany and sort of like has that moment where he's faced himself and has integrated and done that, but he's still stuck in the place. Yes. And needs to now start writing his way out of there. Right. So anyway, all of that is interwoven into this in ways that are, I think, really, really well done. But there's one thing I wanted to say that Ivan had brought up. The what do you call him? He's like the guard in the lodge.
Oh, Birch. Yes, the strong man who kind of follows Hartman around.
He's kind of like like Hartman's muscle.
Yes.
The dude's name is Birch, and that is a reference to a form of corporal punishment from like medieval times.
Oh,
Have
really?
you seen this?
No.
I gotta show you this.
This will be like the 4th punishment item that you've introduced me to during this podcast.
So birching is a form of corporal punishment with a birch rod, typically used to strike the recipient's bare buttocks, although occasionally the back and or shoulders. So they're like tied up to like a...
Oh, geez.
And they just like...
I feel like I've seen something like
whip
that.
them with a birch rod, right?
Yeah. Ooh. And it birch has to do with, there's a tree, like a birch tree?
Yes.
I wonder if it's that.
It's like the dried sticks, twigs, kind of like bundled together.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so that dude's named after that.
After a wonderful torture device.
Freaking crazy. As Barry and Alan drink the Andersons' potent moonshine, Alan's repressed memories surge. He recalls how Jagger manipulated his grief, using it to unleash the dark presence. Alan had clandestinely written Thomas Zane into existence to aid his escape. Realizing his culpability, he understands the depth of his peril. The episode culminates with Agent Nightingale's arrival, promising retribution for the chaos Alan has unwittingly unleashed.
Alan awakens in a grim jail cell. Visions of Cynthia Weaver, the lamp lady from before, haunt his thoughts. As Barry stirs, they hear Agent Nightingale and Sheriff Breaker outside. Nightingale, smug with his evidence, watches Alan convulse, dismissing it as a ploy. In a surreal twist, darkness engulfs Nightingale. Alan and Sarah scramble to prepare, determined to reach Cynthia Weaver at the old Bright Falls power plant. They navigate treacherous rooftops and shadowed streets, battling relentless Taken. So grief can unleash a dark presence, huh? That sounds a little bit like Star Wars, right? Like the idea that, how would you put this? what did it say here? Jagger manipulated his grief, using it to unleash the dark presence. This reminds me of the fear leads to
anger leads to hate,
hate leads to suffering, all that stuff.
It's
the path to the dark side, right?
Yeah.
Also, Sam Lake talked a little bit about this. He talked about the 5 stages of grief and how this game is meant to embody, at least in part, all 5 of those stages, as you see Alan going from the incredulous to the acceptance to, taking kind of that whole journey here. A lot of games will do this. But the connection to Star Wars, I think, is fascinating because it's almost like the darkness is always there, that the dark presence is always there, but that there are certain things that you do or feel or take part in that kind of open the door to invite it in, right? And grief can be one of those, that if you're grieving, then there's an opening for the darkness to fill your heart and to really bring you down. And to take you to a bad place, you could call it, like a nihilistic pit of nothingness, right? And it didn't have a way in until this happened, right? And then once the grief happens, then all of a sudden this heavy, it's nothing, but it's heavy. It pulls you down. It weighs you down. Can gain purchase in your soul because you kind of allow it to, right? Yeah. And so I feel like at least in some way, that's kind of what the game is making a point of here, that the darkness had no sway over him until something happened that it could take advantage of, right?
I really liked this when they get into the jail cell, the way they get out. I am notorious on this podcast especially of not liking prison escape sequences. This one is fine.
It's interesting.
It's one of those ones where, to me, almost the what seems to almost always be true is you write your characters into jail and then you need them to escape pretty quickly after that. You don't want them to stay in jail forever. And so it doesn't matter what it is. There's some really dumb way that they escape. In our Final Fantasy VIII, which is probably one of the worst I've ever seen, examples of this.
Just was way too simple, man. Way too basic.
Yeah. We notoriously kind of called it out for that. Yeah. This one was clever. I actually like it, and yet it is a very short sequence in which
very short,
because you've already established the sheriff being against Nightingale. So Nightingale's got you there in prison. He's coming at you sort of
too.
Gloating about it, taunting.
And he sounds a little drunk.
Yeah, and it's the sheriff is coming to basically get you out, and he's no, this is not happening.
Yeah.
But then in the middle of this confrontation where he's got his gun drawn, and if you step out of that jail, he's literally going to shoot you, and you should believe him at this point. He's tried to shoot you a lot of times, and he's nearly hit a bunch of innocent people.
Yeah.
He all of a sudden remembers one of the manuscript pages. And what he is saying, what's happening was written there already. He's wait a second, this is not possible. And he pulls it out, and then it's then the darkness came and grabbed him, and then that happens.
Grabbed him and pulled him in.
Loved it. I thought that was really cool. Again, because what's really happening here is that Alan is sitting in a room writing this story. That's what's really happening here.
Right.
It's coming to life and it's happening for real, but Nightingale and the characters in the story are all beholden to Alan Wake, who's writing it.
Right.
And so
so they think they caught him.
No, he's in control of the story, man. And so it kind of just solidified all of that. And it was just, I don't know. I liked it. I liked the way that came together. I thought it was clever.
It reminded me a lot of Twilight Princess, actually.
Oh,
when the Twilight Realm shows up and grabs Link and pulls him
through.
Into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was fun stuff.
Yeah. Ivan here is bringing up Nightingale's motel room. I did end up going there. That's it. You can miss it. It's towards the end of the game. You're driving towards essentially the finale of the game, and there's a hotel you can pull off the side of the road.
Yeah.
You can go into his room and or the hotel room where he was staying. And he's got pictures of all the people from the town and you, and there's I think one of the collectibles is in there. And anyway, yeah.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Agent Nightingale,
but Nightingale,
his name.
Yeah.
First off, his name has Night in the name, so it's okay. That's I don't know how common a name Nightingale is, by the way. I I don't know.
That's a good question.
I don't think it's common.
I feel like I've heard it before.
Okay.
But it's not necessarily a name you hear all the time.
No. And it's a little on the nose with the whole knight thing.
Sure.
So nightingale is, of course, a bird. And birds are important in this game. Owls and ravens or crows, whatever they are. And then, of course, Agent Nightingale. He's like his own kind of bird. The nightingale is famous for having a beautiful song. But I don't know that that's relevant here at all. It's mostly just night. It's a night bird. He's a bird of the night, right? So that's his whole thing. He is named for the night, but also after a bird. His name is Robert Nightingale. And I have a lot to say about Twin Peaks, but I refuse to ruin that show for any of you because the internet will literally never forgive me. So I'm just going to not say anything.
You know, I really liked kind of this whole sequence too, where like you're kind of partnered with the sheriff.
Yeah.
And you're kind of fighting with her all through a bunch of different set pieces and stuff. It's pretty engaging. I think from a gameplay perspective, aside from the big chapter 4 climax on the stage.
Yeah, which was
like these sort of sections fighting alongside her were some of my favorites in terms of gameplay. We haven't spoken to this yet. And it's partly because, like, I just don't care.
The game is hard to play.
I don't care to focus on it. It's not, like, really something that I think bothered me enough to keep me from enjoying the game.
Right.
But it's kind of undeniable. And I'm playing the original game, not, like, the remaster. So I'm not even sure, like, how it feels to play in the remaster in contrast.
I don't know how it felt in the original. It's not great.
It's
not perfect.
It's not the best gameplay in the world. Let's can we agree to that? Like,
yes, this is accurate.
I think that there is a little bit of an exaggeration as to how bad it is.
I don't think it's that bad, yeah.
But
we're all about old games, though. So.
It can be kind of frustrating. There were definitely times when I was frustrated playing the game. Let's just put it that way. So, like, this game is one that if somebody out there were to say, hey, man, I'm just not liking this, like, I don't think I can finish it, I wouldn't sit there and go, like, oh, I don't, why? Like,
yeah, what's wrong with you?
What the
Something's
heck?
wrong
that
with
makes
you.
no sense. No,
Yeah,
it's like, I get it. I totally get that.
Yeah.
But I do feel like there's a flow you can eventually find with it where, like, and that's kind of the case with most things, actually, where maybe your brain is sort of trained conventionally to approach this kind of game in this way. And so you're almost playing it. We've talked a lot about expectations recently in the podcast. You have an expectation for this style of game, and it should handle like this, and the layout of the buttons should be like this.
Yeah.
And so when it's not like that, it's kind of like, it's weird. It feels foreign. This isn't like intuitive. There's a better way for this to have been done. But if I feel like if you stick with it long enough, you can kind of like reprogram the the neural pathways a little bit and like get used to it. Again, it's never like a brilliantly fun gameplay experience, but I think it's passable enough to be worth getting through what I think is a really good story.
Okay.
So I just want to acknowledge that because we've been getting some comments out there being like, man, like I just do not like playing this. This is really rough.
Yeah, this is a game
You're not wrong.
Yeah. This is a game I will never play on like the hardest difficulty.
No,
like,
definitely not. In fact, I've heard a lot of people say like, I just put it on easy and that's just the way I enjoy playing it. And you usually won't hear that kind of admission.
Yeah.
But it's usually
for games like this.
in cases where like, it's not so much that like you just need to get good. It's more that like, it's just not, it doesn't feel like great or satisfying all the time.
Right.
But from a gameplay perspective, this section with the sheriff fighting alongside you, I felt were some of the best parts.
I agree, especially as you're crossing the bridge, you're crossing like the dam, like that whole, that was really epic. That was really cool. I loved that whole sequence.
Yeah. This whole chapter I felt like was
it was great. The
really
helicopter,
exciting.
Yeah,
like because you're going with her to get to a helicopter to like fly to where you want to go. That's like the whole first part is just getting there.
Which a small town like this,
and it was like, man,
it's fine.
The sheriff can fly a helicopter.
Yeah, not only do they have
flying a helicopter is like really hard.
You would have a specialist. It wouldn't be just the deputy or even the chief. It's like there's a specialist who probably served in the military for 20 years, and he is your helicopter pilot. That's his job.
Right.
It's not just like the local.
Yeah, I've met helicopter pilots,
Me
and
too,
they literally are hired.
It's their
for
only job.
all kinds of jobs around the world.
But they do nothing
just
but
fly helicopters.
They don't do other things.
They do that. They fly helicopters,
and they get paid pretty well for it.
So. Yeah. So anyway, yeah.
It was really exciting.
There was like that whole part where they're trying to rev up the helicopter, and you're fighting a bunch of dudes, and you have the two lights you have to keep like switching on. And I don't know. From a gameplay perspective, again, I felt like this chapter and the end of chapter 4 with the battle on the stage were like my favorite parts.
Yeah, it was a blast.
I thought they were pretty fun. The town is a battlefield as they fight through hordes of Taken to retrieve chopper keys. Barry, fleeing in panic, joins them in time. The trio fights to the chopper, evading a deadly tornado as they escape towards the power plant. In the chopper, Sarah's tales of her father blend with the rising tension before ravens attack, sending Alan plummeting into darkness. Alone, he confronts more Taken, crosses a perilous bridge, and nears the power plant. The chopper offers brief support, then vanishes. Alan battles his way to the plant, proving his intent to Cynthia.
Cynthia, the Lady of the Light, guides Alan to shut down the overpowering transformer yard. As they traverse a foreboding pipe, Alan receives a harrowing call from Barry. The chopper has crashed. Alan fights through swarms of ravens to the crash site, finding it eerily empty. A flare signals Barry's location, and Alan rushes to their aid, fending off a final assault by the Taken. They race to the well-lit room, battling through waves of darkness, including a tornado. Reaching the safe room, they bask in the sanctuary of light, sealing themselves from the encroaching darkness. Yeah, that's right. Cynthia needed somebody to like prove that you are who you say you are. And he walks in and I think he walks in and she shines this huge spotlight on him. And then he goes, "Hey, I'm looking for Cynthia Weaver." And she's like, "Why? What is your purpose?" And we're like, I don't know, we're just something about Thomas Zane. Basically, all we need to do is say the name Thomas Zane. And she turns off the light and she goes, "I've been waiting like 50 years for somebody to come. Oh, okay, follow me. Let's go." And she like, it's so funny because it's this huge, complicated kind of operation here at the power plant. Oh, yeah. Even just opening the doors, she can run every console. She knows everywhere to go, and she's just slowly walking. She's got her lamp. She just walks from place to place, does this and that, pulls the switches and the levers, gets everything working right, and then is like, "Follow me, let's go." And like, you got to like crank this wheel to open the side of the pipe. Yep. It takes like a full 2 minutes to open. Goes so slow. And she's just telling us stories the whole time. "Oh, I like Thomas Zane. Of course, Thomas knew I liked him, but he liked that other girl, but I didn't mind." And like, it's really, it's fascinating to hear an older lady speak about younger times, you know, and because you look at her old now and it's just like, well, it's just funny. It's funny to think, oh, she was a different person, right? This is a whole different time. She was younger. She was probably prettier, all that kind of stuff. But just to hear I don't know if you've ever heard an old woman talk about stuff like that, but I always like it. It's always really fun. It's like, man, times were different, you know?
Yeah.
And she just opens the side and she basically puts us into the pipes and we just start walking through the pipes. But on the way there, we hear the chopper crash. Yeah. And immediately she's like, "Listen, your friends are dead. keep following me." And we're like, "Well, I don't even know what was that?" She's like, "Your friends are dead. Follow me right now." And we don't. Alan does not follow her. And she says, "Don't be selfish," which I'm like, this is very interesting.
It was an interesting thing to say. Of putting it.
Don't be selfish and follow me. Like, wait, he's going to go check if these people are dead. And if they're not, he's going to go help them. I don't quite count that under being selfish.
That would be caring more about your friends than the whole town
else. Or the whole world. They don't really go that far, but you know.
Yeah, than everybody else.
Yeah. Fair enough. That's true.
What I liked the most about the reveals here concerning Thomas Zane, obviously she liked him. Yeah. He was into Barbara Jagger.
Yeah. Who was a different, an actually different person back then.
She died.
Yeah. And the darkness is just wearing her body. It's like a necromancer, basically.
Yes. And that occurred because Thomas Zane was also a writer. And so what he was writing was coming to life. And he wrote her back into his life, so to speak. But it
wasn't
not
her.
Really her, right? Yeah. And so it was a mistake.
Just her skin suit.
He basically opened the portal for the darkness to come into this world.
Yeah.
In this act of trying to like resurrect his dead girlfriend. And so, anyways, Cynthia was around for all of this. She knows it. But I think the most interesting part was that in order to sort of like stop the darkness, Thomas Zane made a sacrifice in which he wrote himself out of the world.
Yeah.
So like his whole cabin and the Cauldron Lake and everything disappearing.
Disappeared.
Like that was all him writing himself like out of existence into where the dark comes from, basically, to like kind of seal it there.
It was his benevolent sacrifice and then journey into the underworld.
Yes.
It is the harrowing of hell, you could say, after.
It's an archetype. It's
very much so. Oh, yes, that is exactly what I'm saying.
Right. And so that's why Thomas Zane has essentially become a myth.
Yeah.
It's like people like debate the story, like whether it's even true or not, right?
Right.
So I thought that was really clever. Like Thomas Zane has essentially written himself out of existence in this world.
Yeah.
But Cynthia still knows. And there was one sort of like loophole in which Thomas Zane can still like have an influence in the world.
Yeah.
And that was that anything that I leave in a shoebox
is like
will be preserved.
Yeah.
So like his books were in the shoebox back at the cabin at the beginning of the game.
That's right, yeah.
And so like he's written again sort of a loophole for him to still have a way to influence Alan. And you get this with like the clicker, right? Like at the end of the sequence.
It was in the shoebox, right?
It was inside of a shoebox.
And in fact, Thomas Zane had written his childhood story about the clicker into Thomas Zane's books. Well, I guess if we're at the end, right? So spoilers off the table.
Spoilers off the table.
Thomas Zane seems to have been an invention of Alan Wake from the beginning. I don't know. What's your understanding of Thomas Zane? It seems like the story, as Alan Wake during that 1 week wrote the story of what we're experiencing, he wrote Thomas Zane as a character into the story that made Thomas Zane retroactively become a real person previously. Now, I understand. I actually have some subtle knowledge into Alan Wake 2, and that actually undoes a lot of this. But it seems that that's what's being said.
I have to pause for a second. I'm a little bit confused on this point because there's a line that Thomas Zane says, well, Alan and Zane say back and forth to each other in the Writer DLC segment, the episode,
and I have not.
I believe
I played that, but
Alan says something like, you wrote something like Thomas, because Thomas keeps insisting that Alan is writing his own story, right? Like he's creating all of this.
Yeah.
But, and he doesn't ever get a straight answer, but he's like, wait a minute, but you wrote the part with the clicker. Like you had an influence over that with the shoeboxes and stuff.
Right.
And then Thomas kind of like changes the subject. So I wanted to kind of like clarify that with people here in the comments, because this might relate to Kaysen's question too. Like how much of Alan's story, because it sounds almost like Thomas wrote some of Alan's origins with like his mother and stuff that into his life.
And that made it come true.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like kind of at the end of this chapter. That like Thomas essentially like paved the way in the story for Alan to get here and like be a part of this.
Okay. Ivan is saying, it's ambiguous. But Zidart wants us to read this poem real quick, and I think we probably should.
So before we do that, Ivan is saying the question of who wrote whom is one you're going to be wondering about for a while.
And then Drake says
overall.
Alan Wake 2 is going to be a...
Okay, so it's an open question. I wanted to at least understand that I didn't miss the answer now.
It seemed through some of what is being said in the base game that like Alan Wake is saying, hey, I wrote Thomas Zane into the story as a device to help me escape from the darkness.
And is also realizing at another point that Thomas Zane might have written me into existence to begin with.
That's why Beardmo says it's an Ouroboros. There's a
little bit of a who created who kind of scenario here
that's
as
weird.
the writer.
Okay, so I see where you're getting at now, and that's crazy. I don't know.
And I don't,
the answer to that.
And that's what I wanted to make sure is that there wasn't a clear answer yet, because I have a feeling that's maybe something held for another game. But there was definitely some confusion between the two of them, maybe even about this, where they didn't want to think about it too much. Right? I loved how when they're like entering the well-lit room, she's got like, I don't know, hundreds of light bulbs hanging. And she knows exactly which ones need to be replaced soon.
Yeah.
She's like number 89, number 120 something, and number this. Like all need to like be replaced.
They're hard to get to because she replaces them before they go out. These bulbs never go out. She replaces them before they go out. And she's also saying, once you go into the shoebox and get what you need, we don't need this room anymore, basically. So she's saying, hurry up and do what you need to do. I don't want to replace those. And if you get what you get, if you get what was in this box, the clicker, then I don't have to replace them anymore, basically.
Right. Oh, right.
Or maybe someone else can do it for me. I don't know. But she's saying, I'm not doing this anymore, is basically what she's saying.
Yeah.
The name Cynthia means moon. And it actually comes from the Greek. There was a mountain on an island, but the mountain was named after Artemis, the goddess of the moon.
Yeah.
And the name Cynthia references the moon in particular. And it's really interesting because the moon isn't a source of light. The moon is a reflector of light. That's what it is, right? So she seems to be reflecting the light out from somewhere else. Like she isn't doing this of her own volition. This is basically Thomas Zane. He's always covered in light. He seems to emit light, right? But she just kind of facilitates the emission of said light, right? She's a reflector, not an emitter. I guess that's kind of the idea here. And so she's also the light in the darkness, right? So you've got those two kind of things meeting here. And then she brings us to this room, which is the light, which is when we're in the darkness, the emitter of light is Thomas Zane himself. Like he is the being of light that shows up and like gives us stuff and talks to us and helps us. She is his servant, basically. And it almost feels like she has become his wife in a way. After the fact, right? That she has dedicated her life to him and reflected his light in a way that you could say it's something along the lines of like she has kind of married herself to him, basically, and she has committed herself to bringing about his purposes and just reflecting his light instead of her own light. If that makes any sense. This also makes me wonder if she has the numbers of the bulbs for every light in town.
I would not be surprised.
I don't think it's just this room.
I would not be surprised.
Because she's going around everywhere testing things and just
she's
making sure.
Always checking the lights. That's like her whole job.
Yeah.
Her whole existence is around checking every light bulb in every
even in the police
place.
Station, like everywhere.
Literally anywhere to make sure that like if I need light, I know where to find it.
Right. It's great. She's always got her lamp, and her lamp I think is like is it a gas one, or it doesn't seem to be just an electric lamp. It's like one that even with no power, she can still have light.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't notice that.
Seems to be that way. It's one of those old fashioned looking lamps. It could be, fire burning instead of electricity, tungsten, the stuff that you got to replace every so often, or if you drop it, too bad, no more light for you.
Yeah, I like how when he clicks it too, it like basically it switches night to day.
Yeah, when he leaves, he's like, it's daytime? Wait, when did this happen?
Yeah. And so he announces here that this is something he has to do alone.
Yeah.
And that can seem at first like maybe a cliche, like the hero's always got to like, I have to do this alone, like at the end. But this really is important because the whole point of it is that he's facing himself.
Yeah.
Like the whole arc of the story of Alan Wake is that he is a famous person who has a persona that he's not happy with.
Yeah.
And it has sort of ruined his self-image and his relationships.
Yeah.
And he needs to do some shadow work in order to fully integrate and kind of forgive himself for some things and heal.
Yeah.
And so this is now his journey to go battle his shadow, essentially.
And it's something that no one can do for you. not something you have to do on your own. I thought it was fascinating how he points his gun at the cop and then he's like, Barry, take her gun.
Yep.
I don't know that he needed to do that.
No.
She's on your side, man.
Yeah.
Like, she's helping you out. And she also is just like, take it. I don't care. Like, she seems to not feel like anything too illegal is happening here. Might be illegal, but it's not, unethical, I guess. But yeah, I thought that was fascinating. And then, he just leaves and they stay in the well-lit room and he goes with the clicker.
That takes
and he's got to drive all the way across town.
Yeah, because he got to go back to Cauldron Lake now.
Yeah.
So, this basically leads us into chapter 6. Episode 6, Departure. Alan embarks on a perilous solo journey to Cauldron Lake, determined to vanquish the dark presence once and for all. He navigates the treacherous, mountainous terrain around Bright Falls, fending off relentless Taken and dodging massive objects hurled from the depths of the lake. Amidst the chaos, he reaches Cauldron Lake's peak, facing a monstrous black tornado swirling with boats, planes, and debris. With steely resolve, Alan fires flares into the heart of the maelstrom, obliterating it. Guided by Zane's manuscript, he dives into the abyss, awakening in a nightmarish illusion. There, a phantom Alice pleads for him to stay, but Alan seizes the glowing clicker and breaks free.
When I'd told Barry my plan back in the well-lit room, I'd acted as if I knew what I was doing. I didn't. I was operating on the shifting logic of a dream. I had to fight my way to the lake through the horrors of the night. I had to flick an old battered light switch imbued with childhood magic. I had to write a happy ending to a horror story. I love that line, that whole line that he gives there. Kind of showing you the gravity, the monumental task that is before him throughout all of this. Yeah. And of course, as he's doing it, the closer he gets to fulfilling his goal, the harder it gets, right? The harder it gets for him to do what he needs to do, until the point of he's having this dream where his wife, Alice, is alive and is like, hey, come back to sleep. Lay back down and close your eyes and go to sleep.
This was a really, really nicely executed section.
I loved it. And it was right after he had jumped into the lake, right? Because we finally come to the point where the road ends and, you shine your light at all these things. And basically you're at the cliff now. And it's like, here's the lake. This is where I'm trying to go. And he just kind of puts his arms out and jumps into the lake. And as soon as he falls into it, he enters into this dream where he wakes up, and it's like, oh, my comfortable life in New York with Alice. But it's not real. And that's not really Alice. And what she wants me to do is to just give up and lay back down and completely fall asleep and shut off my conscious faculties and just live in the unconscious, right? And he's saying, I can't do that. You're not really Alice. And she's kind of fumbling as she's trying to convince him things. Oh, you're afraid of the dark, aren't you? And he's like, no, you're afraid of the dark.
Yeah. Right? Well, she keeps trying to convince him not to turn on the light and to come back to bed. It's like, that's not what Alice would do.
Yes, exactly. Alice needs the light. Yeah.
Reminds me a little bit of the Odyssey, actually, where the sirens are trying to take on the appearance of Odysseus' wife and are saying things like about his daughters. Like, I'm a daughter, I have a son. I'm not afraid of the water. Like he basically gets them to admit through the conversation all these things that prove they don't really know him the way his wife would. That's kind of like what this conversation with Alice, who is actually Barbara Jagger in disguise during this little section.
That's great. I love, just for Odysseus, the one thing that does get him is when they promise him the knowledge of the secrets of the universe, basically. And he's like, well, you know that? Sure. Someone untie me. That's fun stuff. But of course, Alan, the rope that binds Alan to the mast and that keeps him from falling is all of this. It's the whole story. It's the book. It's everything that we've played up to this point. That's like the fact that he's doing the shadow work for himself. It has created these boundaries that he knows I can't step out of these boundaries, right? Whatever's trying to get me to go over there is not helping me. Yeah. And you're doing that. You must not be the real thing. Right. Right. It's fascinating stuff. And I like that particular sequence, but also some of the other stuff that you read about here before. So before we have to really confront Alice, we're kind of like in the room. And I can't remember if this was a real memory or not, actually. But we're watching that Tonight Show kind of show format,
I like
right?
this.
And it's fascinating because he's looking at it, and we're just the TV just turned on, and we're just kind of watching it, right? And as soon as it's over, Alice is like, "Oh, you were on a show. Like, how'd it go?" And he's like, "Well, I didn't screw it up, if that's what you're asking." And but that really kind of connects us to his persona a little bit. That wasn't him on the show. And as soon as it was, but it wasn't really. It was his persona. It was his
persona
facade
on the show.
And then when in his response isn't, yeah, it was fun. Oh, I did great. Oh, that was interesting. His response was, I'm just glad I didn't screw it up by being who I really am.
Yes.
I acted the character properly, and I didn't break character. I didn't slip. So that's pretty good, right? That's who he has to be all the time, right? And his interpretation of doing good or not was whether or not he maintained that perfect persona facade. That's just a rough life to live.
Yeah.
It's rough to be that way. I know sometimes people have a hard time feeling bad for celebrities. I am one of them. But like it's just a different level of challenge.
It's a different
people have to deal with
kind of challenge.
It's a different kind of challenge.
Again, I'm with you. I understand the sentiment of like, I don't feel bad for celebrities. They have all this money and this great life. Yeah. But it's that's a really simplistic way of looking at it.
It is.
And one in which a lot of people don't understand the pressure, don't understand how difficult it is to maintain real connections with people, having no privacy in your life anymore.
That's the hardest part.
Like, you just adopt a different set of problems.
Yep.
And it's not that, I mean, given the choice, everybody thinks what they would choose, which set of problems they would choose. Yeah. But it's easy to do that when you haven't been through that experience. And for some people, maybe this set of problems is way worse. And that's why there's been a lot of celebrities who regret the fame and wish, they could have not gone through with it. That's not really the point of this. The point is to say that what Alan is dealing with here is he has all of the achievements and success that should lead to self-affirmation and self-love, or at least that we think will lead to that. And yet he hates himself all the more because he feels like he's having to fight to even like project a person that would be acceptable to the public. The real him, the loathsome person is not.
Yeah.
And so like, I loved how in the beginning of that sequence, he wakes up and like puts the sunglasses on because of the hangover and the light is bothering him. And he was out partying all night, and Barry, left a message or calls him about that. Alice is being unreasonable about it. This is part of the job kind of thing, right? Again, is not really who he wants to be.
Right.
It's part of the job.
And he does. Yeah. He kind of snaps at Alice and he's like, sorry, it's this book tour that I've been going on for the past year. It's like, I'm all stressed. And she's saying, well, okay, once it's over, we can be a happy family again. Right.
Yeah.
And then us knowing that this was in the past, this was sort of like a type of memory from the past. I don't think this must be a memory, because the other one is the shadow Alice. That's not the real Alice.
Right.
This one's an
actual memory
of some time previous. And we just know, fast forward to where we're at now, it's like, that happy time never happened. No. Right. You either make it, or if you're the life that he was living just is not a life where you can easily ever take a break.
Yeah. I also loved that, of course, Sam Lake was in that same interview on TV.
Yeah,
and they like, do the face, and he like does I can't even do it. The face of Max Payne.
Yes,
he has that look like he's like,
that's right,
straining, or like he's like taking a crap or something. Like his face just looks weird.
Well,
and so I guess that was a meme that they sort of included in this as a joke or as a self-reference. But
who's the name of the character that Alan Wake writes his books about? It's
it's Alex Casey.
Casey, that's it. And he's saying, this next book is going to be a departure from my previous books, right? And he says these other books are all about Casey. They're all about Casey and his suffering and his pain. He says specifically, Casey's pain. And the word pain there being a reference because Alex Casey is Max Payne, right?
Yeah,
sort of,
basically, the Alex Payne of the Alan Wake universe.
Yeah, I just thought that was a clever little way to work in the word.
And then they spoiled it on the show that he kills Alex Casey in the book, and everyone's like, "What the heck, man?"
It was there's only 4 of you who haven't read it,
and so this was essentially his committing to this idea of I am doing away with the Alex Casey stories.
Yeah,
I'm doing something that's a departure from that.
Yes.
That's going to be my next novel is something totally different. Ended up being a horror story. And yeah.
And this chapter is called Departure. And his book he's writing is called Departure.
Alan awakens to the haunting sight of Zane, clad in a diving suit, who introduces Mr. Scratch, a sinister doppelganger. Alan battles through the encroaching darkness, bringing words to life with his flashlight. Echoes of the past haunt him as he nears the cabin, hearing Zane's anguish as he purges the darkness from Jagger's heart. Confronting Jagger's hollow form, Alan thrusts the clicker into her chest, destroying her. With unwavering determination, he ascends to finish his manuscript.
This was an interesting ending here. So Barbara Jagger is basically like, I didn't do it. I didn't succeed. But I still own you. I guess she doesn't see it coming.
Yeah, so we should maybe clarify, first of all, what she's even doing. So she's possessed with the dark presence.
Yeah.
And the dark presence needs Alan to write with like the magic of the story that comes to life. Write a story where the darkness grows stronger and like comes into the world and like has influence in the world.
Yeah.
That's essentially it's right. It's making him write its own escape from the dark place into the real world.
Yeah.
So that's what Jagger was trying to get him to write the whole time. This isn't really Jagger. It's some like dead corpse that is possessed by the darkness.
The darkness itself, yeah.
And the darkness is trying to make itself more powerful in the real world by making Alan write the story in which that occurs. That's like the process by which the portal opens and it comes in the real world. And he, of course, was trying to avoid that tactfully, writing the story while she's like editing him all along. So that's like what was happening there. And he successfully, with Thomas Zane's help and guidance, was able to kind of sidestep the dark presence, get to this point where he can put the clicker into her and just like vanquish.
Turn the daylight on from inside of her.
Yes, that was what was happening.
So it burns away her, but the darkness does not go away. The house even turns into like this big light beacon shining out. But as soon as he goes upstairs, you're still in the middle of this huge tornado, basically, this big hurricane that's like on the island. There's still, the darkness is still very much there. I was thinking once we got rid of Barbara Jagger that the darkness was gone. That does not seem to be the case.
Nope.
Alan Wake ascends the staircase, and then we kind of hear a little bit of a narration. Everything starts moving a lot quicker at this part. But one of the lines of his narration here is that after getting rid of Barbara Jagger, he says, "Oh, I think I've realized something. I've realized that the scales need to balance. You can't just have a permanent day and a permanent night without darkness, right?" So he's all of a sudden he's saying that, maybe Thomas Zane's preservation of the light and, the darkness being what it is, maybe these things aren't at odds. Maybe you don't have to kill the darkness, right? Maybe you just need to balance the two, which is day and night. It's already a natural thing the world does. But that instead of just trying to get rid of the darkness completely, he's thinking that there needs to be some balance. And then he writes the last words. Well, is it the last words of his book? He did the last words of the game, but he writes the words, "It wasn't a lake, it was an ocean." Right? But when he says it was an ocean, he gets that shadow voice.
Yes.
"It's not a lake.
It's an ocean."
And what I'm thinking, oh crap, he's getting possessed by the darkness.
Yes.
He's never allowed to finish this book or something. I don't know what's happening. But because of what he says here about the scales always need to balance, right? He's kind of realizing that balance is important here, just kind of at the end in this monologue. I'm almost wondering if he is still in control, even though the darkness, he's allowing the darkness in a little bit. Right, but he's going to try to be the balance between the light and the dark.
Well, the shadow is what he's. I think the darkness, at least for what it represents for Alan, is his shadow.
Yes, yeah.
So
this is an integration of sorts.
Yes, we're talking about a departure a departure from living this false life behind the mask of the persona.
Yeah.
I'm departing from that life that was leading me nowhere. I was stagnant as a person. My relationships, my connections were horrible with my wife and with the people close to me. I was spiraling into a place I don't want to go. I need to depart that hollow existence. And that requires the first part of integration of the self is facing the shadow.
It's the horror story.
So the departure, which is the name of this novel, is the process by which he goes to face his shadow. Now he's, in order to save Alice, who was in the dark place, he sacrifices himself. He replaces her. So she goes back to Bright Falls, and that's where the game kind of ends. She gets spit out of the lake and gets out onto the dock there.
Yeah.
And he is remaining there in the dark place to do this shadow work. That's basically what now these 2 DLC episodes are all about. The entire premise of it is essentially he's kind of lost here, and he's going to constantly come across these television screens where essentially his unconscious mind, his shadow self, is writing the story of what's happening to him here in the dark place. He, the character we're playing as in the DLC, is the conscious, rational ego part of Alan Wake's mind, right?
Yeah.
And these 2 things are separated here. They need to be integrated again.
Right.
According to Jungian's theories, that is done through facing the shadow and integrating it, right? So that's this entire DLC is that process.
Okay.
So you have the departure, where he goes to do this work, and then at the end of the DLC, he begins a new novel called The Return.
Return, yes. That's the whole,
And so this is essentially what this all represents. This is all symbolic of that internal mental psychological process, where what we learn through this is he has a lot of self-hatred. He sort of, I love the parts where he has kind of a memory with Alice where she's talking about how you always overanalyze your mistakes. You start thinking, oh, they hate me, this, and you overthink it and begin, turning it into something that it's not. And so you'll have sections where, again, this is all done in a very abstract, dreamlike kind of way that you would expect in the depths of the unconscious mind.
Yeah, it's wild.
Right? Like in a dream.
You thought the first 6 episodes were crazy.
Yeah.
The DLC gets even crazier.
Yeah. So it's all of it is represented through symbols and through this really abstract, crazy imagery.
Very cool.
But that's exactly what you would expect, again, from a dreamlike state where you're swimming in the unconscious mind, right? Which is non-rational.
Right.
And so they don't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But you have that conversation between Alan and Hartman. And Alan, again, this is his unconscious mind, which is always represented with the television screens, right? And so it's Alan with a TV set for a head speaking to Hartman.
Right.
And Hartman's telling him all of these terrible things about himself that he needs to accept.
Yeah.
You've created this fake reality that you've turned yourself into a victim hero, and where you're battling the darkness, and you're doing all of this to avoid the fact that it was your fault, that your wife hates you now, and all of these things that he had kind of been referring to back in in episode 4.
Right.
And the unconscious mind is going, I can't really argue with that. And yes, the blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, he's like,
so
that makes
essentially
sense.
confirming all of these terrible things about himself.
Yeah.
And this is an interesting direction that this game went. Because again, I was sort of like, are they going to go the Silent Hill route, where they essentially reveal at the end that our hero is a terrible guy?
Right, yes. I didn't know. I didn't know where it was going.
And no, they don't. They take a kind of a different route where it's like, no, the hero thinks that about himself.
Right.
But the reality is Alice does love him, and he's just overthinking what.
Right.
And this is something I totally relate to. I think a lot of people do, where you think somebody thinks something about you, and maybe even play scenarios in your head where you're having a conversation. It's going to go this way. And but that's all your own projection. That's all how you see yourself. That's not how the person sees you through their eyes. But you're assuming that's how they see you because that's how you see yourself.
Yep, it's projection.
And so that's all what's represented here is him needing to understand the way that he thinks his wife thinks of him, which is right there. I mean, like in that same scene where with the conversation with Hartman, she talks about how much she hates him and like I'd rather kill myself or like the only like bright side in all of this that I can take is that I will never see you again. Like these types of like horrible, horrible things that that he believes she feels towards him. Right. And then you have that conversation memory where she reveals, no, I don't feel that way. Like you're doing all of this in your own mind. And so they kind of went that route with it. And I think this is all relevant to shadow work, right? Because the shadow that you're dealing with is all the self-hatred and all the parts about you that you believe that are not true, or at least that are not perceived by others, but that you believe. And so you make so many mistakes in the way that you react to people. You maybe have outbursts of anger or anger issues because you assume when a person says that to you, you're interpreting it as an attack. And you get defensive and angry and you respond like that, but it's because you believe they're saying something they're not even saying, right? It's really complicated.
Yeah, that makes sense though. So I've started reading Shakespeare to my kids and we read Macbeth and then we read A Winter's Tale. I think it's called Winter's Tale. But both of these stories deal with, a main character who thinks that other people see him in a different way than they actually do. Like, for instance, with Macbeth, as soon as he does an awful thing, he starts walking around assuming that everyone knows he did it. He's like, that guy knows he did it. I need to kill him too now because he knows. I can see it in his eyes. He knows. And he starts seeing ghosts and having nightmares. And it's because he's just assuming, oh, they suspect me, this person, this person. And it's like the Crime and Punishment. It's like Raskolnikov. You just assume that everyone knows what you know and that everyone sees you the way you see yourself. And so then you start you almost start digging your hole even deeper by doing that. It's like step number one is to try to, first off, come to terms with yourself and your past. But second off, try to find a way to see yourself the way other people see you. Which requires you to be often around other people and to maybe be charitable in the way that you look at other people as well. And then they extend that same grace to you. And then pretty soon you can maybe pull yourself out of that spiral where you're just digging yourself lower. This is the difference between Macbeth and A Winter's Tale, is that Macbeth does not. He keeps going down and down and down and down and down. He destroys everything around him.
Cautionary tale.
Yes, absolutely.
Very much so.
Whereas in A Winter's Tale, Leontes begins that same descent that Macbeth did, but he recognizes it and pulls himself back up out of it with the help of some other people. And he is able to, in the end, kind of, regain some of what he lost and not be such an immoral character.
Right. This is something that again, is kind of a theme of the game that I feel like you just do not fully get without these DLC episodes. You're right. When the game ends and the credits roll, the story is not complete there.
They purposefully chose to leave it off on a really ambiguous cliffhanger ending. Right? They purposefully chose to do that. But they maybe ought not have, or I'm glad they include the DLC.
Literally the best part. Yeah. The part where like the thesis
it all concludes
and comes together is all here.
Because he starts to talk about that at the end in the narration.
Yeah.
But then it's only the last few minutes that you're like, he's starting to integrate, and then it's over. And you're like, wait, what's going on, right? So yeah, the DLC really gives you insight into that process of integration. It's a painful process.
It's a super painful process.
Yeah.
And this is something that I've been so big on recently too. And this is the reason. This illustrates the reason why I've been so into this lately and have talked about it so much, is trying to curb our natural instinct to make such brash assumptions about other people's intentions and things like that. We had a long 3 or 4 episode sort of like, deep dive into Japanese to English game translation and the controversy surrounding that.
Yeah.
And again, I don't speak Japanese. I can't speak for whether or not the examples we're looking at on the screen, this is what they're really saying. I absolutely must, and that drives me crazy to no degree.
Trust.
To someday I will learn Japanese.
Good.
Just so that I don't have to rely on people telling me
what
this is translated correctly or not. Because I was strung over that whole conversation. I'm just strung. Okay, I guess I'll believe you. Okay, I guess I believe you. Like, I don't know who to believe because I don't know what that fetching says.
Right.
But that wasn't the point of why I was having that conversation anyways. Right. That was all irrelevant to me. Right. I literally don't care about that. What I cared about talking about was, guys, there's a lot of bad faith assumptions being made about other people here. And this story, the point that it's making is that we do this all the time to really terrible detriment to our closest relationships. We really ruin them because we are projecting how we feel about ourselves into our interpretation of the actions of other people. We assume why they're doing what they're doing, and we think it's all about us.
Yeah.
And the way that everybody looks at us and hates us really secretly. And so we get defensive and we put up all these walls to keep people out and to protect ourselves, right? And that's what shadow work is all about. Yeah. It's about tearing down those walls and looking yourself in the mirror, that person you hate so much, and changing how you look at yourself.
Yeah, learn to love that person that you hate so much that's inside of you.
To reflect what in actuality, for 99% of people out there, your loved ones see that you're not seeing.
Which is to say only the important people.
Yeah.
Who cares about the other?
You are bound to self-sabotage your whole life by carrying this shadow and not dealing with it.
Right.
Because you will read in the actions of everyone around you things that confirm those self-hating beliefs. And so Alan is having to face that here in the dark place. That's his whole reason for journeying here. We got a graph that Beardmo has put up here in the Patreon chat. This is a universal archetype for a reason. Yeah. There's a reason why the monomyth or the hero's journey is so beloved and is used over and over and over again. It is represented, I think, really strongly in Jung, but of course, just across the board, really, with like work that you do on yourself.
Yeah.
A lot of these archetypes apply to doing psychological work on yourself.
Yeah.
You know, the slaying the demons and the facing of the self. You know, we recently did again, it's not public yet, but for patrons, Never-Ending Story.
I love that movie so much.
It's so good. I
just love it so much.
And there's so much of what we're talking about there in the mirror scene and things like that. And even in the second half of the novel, there's a whole lot more of this kind of thing that's not in the movie, which is why I keep telling you got to read the book. But that's essentially what Alan Wake's story was building up to. It's like the whole thing built up to these 2 very short DLC episodes where like the real crux and like all of the meaning is really there.
Yeah.
And all of this was a pretext to get us there and a setup to get us there. And I loved how you said earlier that this cardboard cutout represents the persona he cannot get away from this thing until he literally has to go out of the real world and into the dark place to be able to deal appropriately with the shadow. And as you finally fight your way, and I love just the whole, like, I guess sort of like the plot setting of this dark place. Alan is not integrated with his self here. He's been split. You have his unconscious mind that is asleep and is writing the story he's experiencing here specifically in these 2 episodes. The ego.
And then also, I would also say that his persona has been spun off of him as well in the form of Mr. Scratch. I don't know a ton about Mr. Scratch, but what Thomas Zane says is that, oh, he's Mr. Scratch. Don't pay him no mind. He'll just go out in the world and be the face of you.
Right.
You're going to be doing some other important stuff. Just leave him
right.
be. And
the doppelganger.
He seems to be something along the lines of your persona is going to be there, but you won't be. You'll be somewhere else.
Yes. And so basically you come across these like little TVs all throughout these episodes, and it's a narration from the unconscious mind dictating the story that's happening to you. And Alan keeps getting frustrated and like calling himself an a-hole and stuff like that.
Yes.
Right.
I love that. I love that so much.
I can't believe you keep putting me in these situations, but that's the point.
I've often said that if I could meet myself, we wouldn't actually get along.
That is the point of it.
Yeah.
The point of it is you see yourself this way, and that's what shadow work is. You're dealing with this person you hate, which is how you perceive yourself.
Right.
And so it's a journey to integrate the conscious with the unconscious, which is what happens at the end. Now that he's dealt with that, now that he's faced the shadow, now that he's fully integrated, now he's got to find a way to return, which is the beginning of the next novel he starts writing at the very end of that.
At the end of the DLC.
It's freaking really beautiful.
Yeah.
Like these 2 episodes, these 2 DLC short, like 1 hour a piece episodes, for me is like where Alan Wake hits, it lands its story. Like it all comes together and like totally lands in a way that just hit me in a really powerful way. And so, it's totally essential as far as I'm concerned. If you have played Alan Wake, let's say you played it back when it came out,
and
before the DLCs were released, you didn't actually get the full story at all. Yeah. It's so essential to play these DLCs, and they're great.
One of my notes, actually, as I played through the DLCs was, like, this game was good, but up until the point of the DLCs, I'm thinking, wow, now this game has entered next level status.
Yeah.
Like, now
now
it's find
excellent. The story was entertaining and fun, and had some nice style to it, and set up some good stuff. But like, it becomes a great story.
It does,
with the dark place portion of it.
I found my note here. I wrote up to this very ending part where things are going absolutely haywire and we're hamster crawling through all kinds of scenes. There's like that revolving cylinder.
That is awesome.
Freaking crazy.
That was awesome.
I love it when games really mess with physics
as
like
a
that.
set piece. Like that was the coolest set piece of the whole game.
That was cool.
Bar none.
At that point, I was like, hey, I thought the game was pretty good up to this point, but this is so much fun and absolutely wild. I love the intensity. The game gets so good and so much fun at this point in particular. And I like what you were just saying about doing the shadow work and how we've talked about this a little bit in the past, but it's not just about you. It's not just, oh, now you see yourself better. Isn't that good for you? Now you can go. It's the way you treat other people, the way you see other people. This affects everything around you. It's not just you. This affects your image of yourself can make other people feel bad about themselves, or can make them have a bad day, or like you're negatively affecting the world around you. And it's almost like your self-perception, like how I mentioned before with that line about how grief can be an entry point for the darkness. Well, having a negative self-image is a wide open gate to the darkness, inviting the darkness to come and weigh you down, because you got to live with that guy. Mm-hmm. It's you, right? You can't just separate yourself from that. And the more that the darkness enters you, the more that it can spread to other people through you, right? And you can't, it's not just about helping yourself. It is essential that you do this so that you can help the people around you as well. And by that, essentially, butterfly effect, like you're helping the whole world when you do this. You're not just helping yourself.
100%.
That's why it's so important.
100%. And essentially, as you learn to love and be charitable to yourself, you will have such an easier time exuding that out towards others is exactly what you're saying here.
Yeah.
And so if you're a person, and I'm not saying this to be demeaning or condescending at all.
Shadow work takes a lifetime.
It does. It's
like
not,
for me.
It's not you're gonna do this in some instance of your life and then you'll be good.
Now you're good. Yeah.
It's a lifelong process for sure. But what I'm trying to say is, if you are a person and you're the only one who can answer this if you're listening to this. If you're a person who is sort of quick to anger, might have just be a real irritable person. I still struggle with this, but I was way worse about 5-6 years ago. I was just getting to the point where I literally would fly off the handle if I was in a car driving anywhere, just screaming
if
at
somebody
people.
cuts you off or does
if I
just
was in
the
a grocery
smallest thing
store
wrong.
and a person was like blocking the lane, I was so easily irritated. Just
I've been
so easily irritated all the time at everything and everyone. And just the littlest
it bleeds
thing
out, by the way.
could just make me fly off the handle. So
and people can feel that.
So when I'm asking the audience, if you're this type of person, I'm speaking from someone who deals with this. The issue happening there, I believe, is really internally how you feel about yourself.
Yeah.
You are projecting in these people's intentions that they're trying to get in your way.
Yes.
That they're trying to make your life harder or you're making everything about yourself.
Yeah, it's a selfish, it's almost a childish way to view the world, which is I'm the middle of the universe. And anything anyone does, everyone's always looking at me, everyone's always talking about me. Everything everyone does is always with reference to what I was just about to do.
Yes.
It's a childish, immature way of seeing the world.
Yes.
And a lot of people are just stuck in it, right? Because it's hard to step outside of your own perspective.
And that's all rooted in how you see yourself.
Yeah.
You actually feel those things about yourself, and so you're assuming that person attacking you all the time.
And so then you might preemptively attack them because you think that, just like with, that's the reason I brought up Macbeth.
In order to avoid and protect having to deal with that person you hate inside, you're blocking that. And firing from the walls.
I have an example.
At others.
I have an example. And once again, this harkens back to the immature kind of childish aspect that you have to go through it. Everyone goes through it.
Yes.
It's not bad. It's just you need to level up from there instead of just stay there. But let's say you were 15 and you woke up and you have a big pimple on your forehead and you're like, I know everyone's going to talk about this. And so when you go to school, you start looking for any blemish on anyone else's face too.
Yeah.
And then you point it out to them. They were never even going to point it out. They were they were going to be totally cool with you. But because you're so self-conscious, you're noticing it now in everyone else. And you're like, oh, this person, you got a thing there, haha, and then you do too. Oh yeah, okay, I guess I do too. You can even be self-deprecating about it as long as you can take someone else down with you, right?
Yes.
And then it feels a little bit better. But that's so negative. That's so negative. But a lot of people are like that.
And that's essentially, again, what I was trying to get at in our conversation about Japanese and English localization and what's been on my mind a lot recently. Is the reason we're doing this, the reason we talk like this to each other, the reason we make these bad assumptions is because we're not doing the work here.
Yeah.
I have found that the more that I have done that, the more that I've really, really focused on it, the byproduct of that work is I'm kinder to people and I assume way less about their intentions. Instead of assuming they're after me, I just ask them questions and then we have a great conversation about it. And I go, oh yeah, everything's cool. Whereas maybe a few years ago, I would have made an assumption and I would have closed that door to talking with them.
Yeah.
Or maybe gotten angry, lashed out or something like that.
Yeah.
Right. Instead, it's prompted questions and listening and charity.
Right.
And that is the byproduct of doing the shadow work.
Yeah.
So I am assuming, because I haven't played Alan Wake games after this, Alan is going to be a more integrated person, but is trying to get out of the darkness and back to
it's still a journey
the real world,
getting
right?
out.
So that's all I have to say.
I love
about
this game.
Alan Wake. I think it's a great game.
I absolutely love this game. This was so much fun to play.
I want to read very quickly some and just I guess corrections to that people brought up in the comments.
Oh, there was one question or comment that I wanted to read real quick. So here was a comment that I thought was really good from Queen Marcia on our last Alan Wake video. And I'm going to say she, because it says Queen. She says, Stephen King has no memory of writing Cujo.
Oh,
apparently.
yeah. This is a good comment.
Yeah. He was on a heavy bender and doesn't remember any of the process. It's very likely that Sam Lake knew about this and incorporated it into the game. A lot of Stephen King references and quotes and all this stuff all throughout the game. And so I would not put it past him either, that idea. What would it be like to not remember writing something and then to discover it later?
Yeah.
And that's almost like the premise for this whole thing.
Totally is.
But it comes from an actual experience that Stephen King had.
Yeah, that was really cool. I'm glad that you brought that up. This one comes from It's Jules 1, and this was also a comment from the previous video. So more than one person has said this, so I really wanted to make sure we addressed it. I just wanted to add some info. No one actually called in Nightingale.
I saw this comment.
He tracked Alan down by himself.
Yes, I believe more is revealed about Nightingale in other games.
Supplemental material.
Yeah, he's got his own whole crazy thing he's dealing with too.
No one called in Nightingale. He tracked Alan down by himself. By the time he comes to Bright Falls, he's actually already been let go from the FBI. Sarah Breaker even says at one point, your opinion would matter more if I actually believed you were here on official business.
Yeah, I remember that.
I believe the info about him being let go from the FBI can be found in the game in his hotel room. But his reason for hunting down Wake is explained in a novel outside of the game.
Okay.
So, yeah, he is actually not there representing the FBI. He's there for personal reasons.
Yes, that's why he's there. But where did all of the helicopters and
cops come
there
from?
seemed to be a whole FBI operation here. Bright Falls does not have multiple police helicopters. That's insane. This is a small town. I lived in a small town. They didn't have one, okay? Small towns cannot afford one, let alone multiple.
Yeah. Maybe that novel that is being referenced there
the hospital
kind of explains.
The Tri-County Hospital might have had one.
Anyway, just wanted to make sure that we made that correction. Thank you, everybody who engages and comments and keeps us on the right track. We do appreciate those corrections. And we appreciate you watching. This is a great series, a lot of fun, and we hope you enjoyed it. We will be announcing very soon what our next game is going to be. Yeah. Actually, what the next 2 games are going to be. So stay tuned for that. It'll be out soon. Till then, peace out.